Hello, I'll put the link in the description where I just compiled a collection of old stonemason techniques using hand tools and just moving, cutting, and doing all sorts of things with stone that apparently is impossible without ancient lost high technology and the development of diamond technology, as they say. This is one of them. It's from Stone Mountain, Georgia, and this one's, we'll come back to it, but again we just see a sculptor, simple measuring tools, simple tools. They made wonderful sculptures. And then will be, well, how it's, small scale experiments have never been scaled up. It's just one of his, I keep, the lost high technologists are now trying, because they're drilling and all of the other things they said were impossible, is people have been replicating them and showing, I myself have put up many how-tos doing what is supposedly impossible by these expert lost high technologist researchers and grifters, tour guides. So on the left, Stone Mountain, Georgia, it's a giant relief. We'll look at it more. But on the right, we see a plumb line, simple, ancient, effective tool. Doesn't need batteries, doesn't need to be calibrated. It always works, always will work. So plumb line, very important. It's mentioned in the Bible and all sorts of other traditions as well, associated with truth. Ancient Egyptians in the Book of the Dead, one of the commandments was not to tamper with the plumb line on the measuring scale. Ancient Egyptians had the plumb line. Ancient survey tools, you can see there, whether to measure horizontal or to measure vertical, you use a plumb line. Very simple tool. These ancient survey tools were basically the standard up until the development of more modern equipment, from ancient right up to the modern time. And of course, ancient people knew how to use measuring sticks. So we have plumb lines, we have measuring sticks, basics of surveying. And again, I tend to think that the ancients, were not, without logic, that they had skill, which is something that apparently lost ancient high technology can't fathom. But plumb line, still used now in dams where they want to measure tiny movements in the dam wall in case there's a problem. They hang a plumb line. They also use electronic measuring devices, but a plumb line still, again, doesn't need to be calibrated. It doesn't run out of batteries. If you want to measure a wall, but there's a deformity in the wall, still they'll use plumb lines. Now, more and more we become so dependent on electronics and advanced machines that we now take things for granted. Heavy lifting is one of them. If a big steel iron crane with a big motor doesn't come in, apparently you can't lift, but they did it in the past, no problems. We've just become dependent on technology, and we've lost we don't want to do things for ourselves. It has to be easy, and it has to be with a flashing light and a digital display. If there's not a digital display on it and a motorized sound, somehow it's not proper. But we can measure, for instance, measure a bow of a wall. Now imagine that bowed wall as a profile of a face, and that's exactly the technique we're going to show. So there on the bottom right, we see a sculptor. Now, instead of using a plumb line, he's using squares because he has a flat surface, but he's getting the horizontal, and then he's measuring with whether it's with a ruler or a set of pincers, and he's going to, so either side of the nose, everything has to be symmetrical on either side for that sculpture. So you move it an inch away from the center of the chin, you move it an inch from the center of the chin on the other side, and you plot out all your points. Now we'll look at that more in depth, but a plumb line using a ruler. So again, now back to Stone Mountain, Georgia, there on the left. What's that frame hanging down? It's a series of plumb lines. They're going to hang vertical all the time, and then you space them equally, and then from there you can take a set of measurements, and then you can start to develop your profile. So that's the technique used, and that's the technique that's always been used. Now this is 2010, giant granite colossal sculpture, Bahubali in India. How was it done? There's the sculptor. Well, he made a small model, and because he wanted symmetry, and this is over the 42 feet, there was a half an inch deviation, and it was properly measured. It's not a Chris Dunn type of measurement using Photoshop. But we see there that he's just created a series of plot points. Horizontal lines, vertical lines, equidistant. We get a grid. and we can use that to measure from, we have a distance from from the tip of the nose or from the belly button, or we just, and because it's symmetrical, we only need half as many plot points, because everyone you take, if you move 1 foot to the left, you take your measurement, then you just move 1 foot to the right and you repeat it. Symmetrical sculpture is easier because you only need to take half the measurements and simply repeat them on the other side. The lost high technologists still go, oh, symmetry, but Roman sculpture is asymmetrical. They have lost touch with reality if you think that a symmetrical sculpture is more complicated. Just if you've ever worked on a CAD or 3D modeling, or if you just had any sort of sense of working with reality, you would realize immediately that asymmetry, to replicate that, is much more difficult, because there's just so many more plot points. It's like a wire mesh grid when they do animations and stuff. There's more information in there in asymmetry. It's just ridiculous at that point anyway. So we go back to Stone Mountain, Georgia, and there compare it with the Bahubali, and we see symmetrical statue, only need half of the plot points, and then you just transfer it over. Both made out of granite, so that's how they made it. They got the plumb lines hanging there. You take a measurement down and across, and you transfer that data over. So the Bahubali sculpture, I don't think a 10 to 1 or 40. So 5 to 1 scale, you take your measurement, you multiply it by 5, and you turn a small scale model into a giant, colossal 41.5 foot sculpture. How it was done, it's how it was done in the past. It's still how it's done now. Again, simple tools if you want to make a giant colossal sculpture, do it like the people that did it not too long ago. They're in Stone Mountain, Georgia. Do it like Ashok Gurijar did in the last decade. It's as simple as that. So again, simple measuring tools, simple techniques. A bit of hard work and dedication to your skill. Then there'll be the issue of iron versus copper. I've dealt with that in earlier videos, but in more upcoming ones. But I just wanted to show, flint works, these other tools work, but how do we, do we need giant CNC machines and 3D lasers and rangefinders and all this advanced technique? No, you don't. You simply don't. Those lost high technology, Chris Dunn, Uncharted X, Brian Foster, NEXT, all these, they're just have no concept or no interest in this. Their expert engineers and their expert stonemasons literally have no clue what they're talking about. Otherwise, they would have presented this information, but they've got too much money to make from the tours, and that's what's happening. So, giant relief there on the Stone Mountain. You see the size of the people there in the grass in front of it. It's no small thing. And now we see two photos. So on the left we see during construction, and on the right as it is now. Important point is, notice these little holes there, how they plotted it out. How did they mark it? And we'll see a better example in a moment. I'll show you some video of someone doing the same exact thing. But on the one on the right, you can still see a lot of those, not a lot, but quite a few of those plot points out there. So that's great, because firstly we got the photo of them using the plumb lines, but we also see the technique that they used, and it's still used, ancient technique, and it's still used today. So how did they make the colossal, giant Egyptian sculptors? Well, how did they make the Bahubali one? How did they do Stone Mountain, Georgia? How did people still make beautiful, precise, exact copies of sculpture? Well, we'll see that in a moment. They either use a pointing tool or a series of plumb lines. Exact same principle. You just take a series of measurements and you transfer it over. It's not difficult. It's not a secret, but it is trouble for ancient lost high technology, because all of our foundations have been crumbling. And I can't do an experiment of this because I'm not a sculptor and I don't have access to these huge stones. But like now, you have to say, I'm sure he'll come up with some excuse for this as well. But if it's steel versus copper or flint, no, sorry, too bad. Okay, let's now look at some video and we'll see the exact process, and we'll compare Stone Mountain, Georgia to an actual proper, someone who knows what he's doing and works with his hands and ancient techniques, not using power tools. Okay, so let's look at a sculptor using ancient techniques to make a perfect copy of a clay model. So firstly, there we see he begins with a human model. He makes his clay version of it, and now he needs to transfer that into stone. And it's an ancient technique of a pointing tool of a pantograph, but he begins with making the basic form. But notice there's those wood pieces there, and that's called a pantograph. And so we start with a frame, and we'll see him using this, or a pointing tool. Now you can look this up. So he has the base of the statue, and he fits the pantograph to a fixed position on the stone that he's comparing it to, and then he adjusts that pin to that point. Now the pin, if it's too short, it's not going to hit his mark. So there we see, look, just like the Bahubali sculpture, he's finding points on the clay model, and then he's just transferring it over to the 3D model. And as he gets further and further along, so again, just taking measurements from the original, transferring it over. He's using a pointing tool or a version of a pantograph, but it's the same principle as a plumb line and a ruler. You have the plumb lines hanging, and you take the measurements that are going off from there. Okay, now we see as sculpture progresses, notice that on the stone there on the left, see all those little drill holes, those little plot points in there? He's found a point on the clay model. He's drilled in those, they form the low point. And so just like this Stone Mountain there in Georgia and that relief in there, now once he has all those points marked out, and now it's just a matter of smoothing out the stone. So the Stone Mountain in Georgia, you can luckily still see traces of those. We see the technique with the guy hanging down with the plumb lines in there, and how sculptors still work. There's a fascinating, everything CNC, advanced, lost ancient high technology, advanced precision machining. This is old school method. People working with their hands and doing their tools. Now, in further videos, I've covered it before, but I'll go in a more concise series. Now, he has a steel tool. Actually, I'll find that clip and put that in there, because whether it's granite or marble, you can use you can use flint tools. They just work. If you don't accept that, I'm sorry, but there's been people have used them. They do work. Go get a piece of flint and granite and start hammering away, and then compare it with using a steel tool. Steel is better, but flint works as well. Also, the ancient Egyptian copper was not pure modern 99.9% copper. It was arsenical bronze, in that it had over 1% arsenic by weight, which makes it a much different type of tool as well. But now, as we go further, so whether you're using a stone hammer, a flint tool, or a steel tool, it's not the tool, it's the skill of the worker. Steel is better, but you can do them with those other tools. And we see how he's smoothing out until he gets all of those fine points flattened out and smoothed over. And if you have enough of those points, you just go find the flat point, the low point where that little drill hole is, and you just keep working down until it's all smoothed out. Stone Mountain, Georgia, they didn't do it. The Bahubali, recent giant colossal granite, otherwise lost high technology sculpture there in India, they did it as well. The level of ignorance on their topic when it comes to lost high technology is frankly remarkable. Or the level of disinterest in finding any, they've got solutions and they're looking for problems, and it's a business, and that's all it is. It is lost high technology is a giant scam. They literally know nothing about materials. They know nothing about lifting and rigging, and they know nothing about stone. That's why they're always, Mohs hardness, and that type of thing as well. So that's the technique. You want to make a giant one, use exactly the same. You just hang down big plumb lines and use a bigger ruler. So just like the Bahubali sculpture that we saw earlier, he could take this, and if you give him the funding, without laser range finders and 3D scanners and CNC machines, you can make a giant colossal sculpture of that. Once you have your original, you want to make it 1 to 100 scale, you take your measurements and you just multiply them by 100. It is as simple as that. So give respect to to craftsmen and the skill. Our ancestors were not stupid, otherwise we would not be here. But so when it comes, colossal serapeum, not just serapeum, the giant statue sculptures, how did they do it? Well, they had brains, and they had hard work, and they had the funding to do it. The king said, "I want it done." He gets it done. We don't have you don't have to worry about paying for the stone because he owns the quarry. You don't have to worry about paying for the tools because he owns the quarries and the mines and everything else there in between. And so, for those who don't want to know, well, I can't help you. But for those who are maybe being drawn into this lost high technology, it can't be done. It can't be done. How did it do it? You need advanced machines. You need advanced. No, you don't. What you need is an interest in stonemasonry and sculpture, and the truth shall set you free.